For so long, I felt like I just am who I am and there's no changing it. So, I'm not very outgoing. I'm not very extroverted. So I'm never going to have very strong people skills. And no, that was totally wrong. People skills are just like any other skills. They can be cultivated and developed. And once you do that, once you put in the work to do that, you will feel more confident about it. And the same is true of fitness, and the same is true of your mindset and your style and any other realm of life.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Jeff Callahan here, founder of Become More Compelling, and you're listening to another episode of Become More Compelling Radio, the podcast where I take people skills, charisma, persuasion, networking experts, and I crack their heads open, suck their brains dry just like a zombie, and pass that glorious information on to you on a silver platter. I'm really excited for you to join me today. We're going to be talking about what makes guys confident. And I've actually got a guest today. His name is Dave Bowden. He is the Amazon #1 best-selling author of Ready to Roar: How Shy, Quiet, Self-Doubting Guys Become Strong, Charming, Self-Confident Men. And he's also the founder of IrreverentGent.com, a blog dedicated to helping guys build confidence. His work has been featured in the Good Men Project, Well Built Style, and Active Man Magazine, among others. Like, this one's for the fellas. Anyone can listen, because I think there's some good insights in here for everyone, but it's geared specifically towards men, and kind of the self-development journey that Dave's been on is really fascinating. He came from a place where he was extremely shy and reserved, would talk himself out of applying for jobs, to a place where he's worked on himself over the last decade, and it really shows. So he's going to share some of his insights along that path. And what he really focuses on with people is style confidence, fitness confidence, people skills confidence. So really useful stuff. And on a deeper level, it's the stuff that's not taught in any textbook. So if you're a guy in your 20s or 30s and you just know that you need to step up when it comes to confidence, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to people skills, style, all that stuff that you have to learn by yourself. You have to do it, because no one's going to give it to you. You have to go out and find it and learn it. Dave's advice is great because it's super practical and it's really doable. And that's one of the things that I really like about his advice. And it's something that I really strive to serve you guys, is having advice that you can take action on, because action trumps information. You can consume information for the rest of your life, but guess what? It's not going to do you any good if you don't implement it, because that's where the rubber meets the road. And it's the most important, and it's the determining factor by a factor of 1,000,000. It's the determining factor between people that improve rapidly, really, really quickly, and people that are just in an armchair somewhere saying, oh yeah, I read about that. I know how to, no, you don't, because you haven't actually done it. So you can find more about Dave at irreverentgent.com. And I'm also going to include show notes that include all the links that we talk about, including a link to his book. So you should definitely check that out, because it's wherever ebooks are sold. That's also code for you've got it in your pocket right now. You just need to go and download it. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Dave. Hi, Dave.
Hey, man. Great to be here.
Hey, so it is fantastic to talk with you. I'm so glad that we're having this conversation on my podcast, because I'm excited to help a lot of the guys out there when it comes to kind of being self-conscious, being shy, kind of honing their people skills. So I'm really excited about your stuff. And just to lead off here, I read an article that you wrote, and I thought it was really fascinating. You were at a party, and you were talking with your girlfriend's sister's brother-in-law, and you guys talked about Portugal. And like for months after that, just because you were interested in what he said, he would always like check up on you and say like, man, that Dave's a really cool guy. Could you walk us through that? Because I thought that was amazing.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So that's just sort of I guess it's a little tactic or a hack that I use for conversations. And what's great about it is that it doesn't actually require you to know anything about the person you're talking to. So you can use it when you're meeting somebody for the first time, which can often be rather a pretty nerve-wracking experience. At least I know it can be for me. So when I sort of stumbled upon this trick, I thought it was like gold. And basically all you do is you start you ask them about themselves. And the way the Portugal thing came up in this particular instance was that I had overheard him telling somebody else that he had just got back from a trip to Portugal. So when he and I sort of found ourselves sort of cornered alone at the party, and it was clear that, we were going to have to make small talk with each other, I already sort of knew where to start because I had been listening and keeping an ear out for little tidbits like that might help. So when I heard him mention his trip, he and I were sort of alone in the corner, and I said, "So did I hear you mention that you just got back from Portugal?" And he sort of just went off from there. I really just had to ask that first question, and his face sort of lit up, and he started talking about his trip just completely unprompted, and sort of spoke for, I don't know, 3-4 minutes, just kind of going on about how much he loved it. And then there was a bit of a lull, and then I could just say something as sort of innocuous as, "Don't they make wine there too?" And then he just went off about all the wine that they make there and all the great wine that he drank. So we ended up having a great chat of about 20 minutes, but it only really involved me asking maybe 3, maybe 4 questions. But it was a great talk, and he was left with a good impression of me because he spent the whole time talking about something that he was really enthusiastic about. So for a couple months after that, I guess he would mention to my sister-in-law that he really liked me, and he would always ask about me. So it worked really well in that case.
Yeah, and what's awesome, and there's actually a little bit to unpack here, which, I mean, it's great. So you were able to be curious about him. What some people might think is like, oh, if I bring up like that he went to Portugal, like, isn't it creepy that I was listening? It's like that stuff doesn't matter. You're just giving him a platform, and you're being curious to set the stage where he can talk about something that he already likes. And you're right, people do generally like it when they talk about themselves, especially if they have something cool, like they've been on a great trip. So there's so many wins there, and it just took 5% more action on your part. So I love that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you brought up a good point. Like, you want to make sure you're referencing something that is sort of already in the public domain. So I had heard him mention Portugal to somebody else at this party. So obviously I knew it was something he wanted to talk about. But it would have been different if it was somebody who I didn't know, but I had seen on Facebook or something. And I brought up like, "Oh, I saw on Facebook that you went to Portugal." I mean, that's a little bit creepier.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Like, I was outside your bushes with night vision goggles, and I was actually reading your lips, and you said the word Portugal. So what's the story there?
Sorry, I noticed that at 7:15 you ordered a pizza last night. How was that?
Yeah, so pretty bright line between A and B, like creepy and non-creepy. But that's kind of the James Bond opening. So I love that. It's a tactic that anyone can pull out right off the cuff. But let's back up a second. So Dave, what's your story when it comes to kind of honing your, not only your people skills, but your confidence, your style? Because what I like about you and your advice is it really is kind of the whole package. It's like almost from like inside out. So I really like that. What's your story?
Well, I mean, basically, there's sort of two sides of the story, I guess, that are relevant for this discussion, the sort of professional and the personal side. And obviously, they overlap a bit. The professional one is pretty quick. I went to journalism school. I've always been sort of a bookish guy. I've always been a word nerd. So journalism school was a natural fit for me. So I was a journalist. And then shortly outside of journalism school, I got a job, kind of got my foot in the door as a copy editor for a company that published fitness and health magazines. So that was great because fitness was already sort of an interest of mine. So I got my foot in the door there and then sort of worked my way up to become the managing editor of 2 of their titles, which was amazing because as a journalist, anytime you can sort of marry the things you're already interested in with the things you're working on in editing, you're in a good position. And I just learned a lot about sort of, communication, journalism, the combination of words and pictures to communicate ideas. So that was great training. And then I sort of used that and parlayed that into my site, Irreverent Gent. And I sort of, draw on a lot of that experience now to do what I'm doing. And then the other side of it is the personal side, which I also draw on arguably more than my sort of professional background. And basically, I mentioned that I'm, a book nerd and a word nerd. And I've always just been sort of an introverted guy. And I enjoy people. I really like being around people, but I definitely just find it exhausting, as introverts do. It's something that drains me of energy rather than something that gives me energy. And as a result of that, I didn't really understand introversion well until just a couple of years ago, really. So I would often sort of kick myself and get down on myself for not being more of an extrovert, not being more of a people person. And I think for years, definitely throughout my early 20s when I was in college, that really kind of held me back, and I really I punished myself a lot for that, I think. And that led to quite a bit of insecurity and uncertainty about who I was and how I was going to make my way in the world. So at a certain point, I sort of realized that, okay, this is is how I'm feeling. And the only way I'm going to kind of overcome this is if I make an investment in myself and I really commit to learning more about myself and my mind and figuring out what can I do, because I realized that, yeah, I was nervous around people and I was an introvert, but I also had certain skills and I felt fairly confident in certain aspects of my life, but not at all confident in others. So I thought, what can I do to kind of turn that around and build up the confidence that I need in these areas that I feel like I'm lacking? So I really just threw myself into this sort of self-improvement, personal development mission and just kind of went on a tear of reading everything I could get my hands on, learning everything I could find about my mindset and personal development, and then really threw myself into the gym. So I mentioned that I was a fitness buff and just really kind of threw myself into that, and definitely found that as I built up my body, it also improved my mindset, and vice versa. Because I had a more confident mindset, I was more confident just sort of stepping foot in the gym and feeling like I belonged there. And the two sort of fed each other really well. And then, as I say, I was an introvert, and being around people sort of made me nervous. And I recognized that that was something that I was really going to have to work on. So I really just focused on that and read as many books as I could and learned as much as I could about sort of human interactions, and just sort of slowly but surely over a period of about a decade, developed the skills that I had been lacking. And it was kind of a long road and kind of a slog, but I realized at the end of it, I've really done it. I've really sort of achieved what I was hoping to achieve. I'm a lot less nervous. I'm a lot more sure of myself. And I figured, since I am able to do it, I bet a lot of other guys are too. So that's sort of why I started my site and wrote my book, to kind of help guys shorten their learning curve and reap a lot of the benefits and the lessons that I learned, but do it in a lot less time and hopefully with a lot less monetary investment in books.
Yeah, so that's great. And my story is pretty similar, because I went on this like a 13-year at this point self-development binge, and I think you can get from point A to point B faster than maybe we did, but because we kind of slogged through it, as you very correctly put it, I mean, it puts us in a position where we can give a little bit more perspective, because we've kind of gone down almost every rabbit hole possible.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, because I think this is really interesting. So when you start improving yourself, and improving yourself when it comes to confidence, when it comes to mindset, when it comes to body, so there's always, because I get a sensation that you might be similar to me. I really like to get a lot of information. You have a journalism background. I actually went to journalism school as well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, print journalism, which woohoo!
Same
industry.
with me.
I mean, I can blog now, so that's technically print.
That's right. There's a reason we both have websites now.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. So we had to evolve. And it's funny, because I like a lot of information, but I've realized over the years that getting too much information is a bad thing. It's the difference between just in case information, where you're kind of hoarding information. Like, what if I need to start a conversation with a left-handed barber from Albania? It's
right.
It's like you probably don't need to know that, because it's probably not going to happen. And it's better to get just in time information so that you can learn something conceptually and then go out and take action on it. Because one of the big things that I see with people skills especially is someone who's kind of in that hesitation mindset. Mm-hmm. It's usually just because they haven't actually gone out and practiced, and they're trying to come up with algorithms of like, this might happen, what if this happens, then this might happen. It's the classic overthinker's problem. So did you have any of that? How is that moving from consuming information to taking action?
Yeah, no, I definitely, that's something I struggled with as well. And I can definitely relate to that problem. What I found, I think I got sort of lucky, because one of the books that I read and stumbled upon fairly early, sort of in my personal development, was the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in that book, the author, Stephen Covey, one of the things that he recommends doing is creating a mission statement. And it's a personal mission statement that essentially, you can make it as formal, informal as you like. But the idea basically is just to come up with an idea of the person that you want to be. Who are you at your highest ambition? And for different people, that's going to mean different things. And for some people, it's going to mean a lot of career success. Other people care less about that. They care more about, personal success, having strong relationships. So whatever's important to you, that's what you're going to value. So when you're coming up with your mission statement, you just kind of envision, and it sort of forces you to think about, who do I really want to be? What's my sort of North Star? Where am I headed? And for me, coming up with that was what really helped sort of keep me as much as possible from that information overload, because it allowed me to identify what pieces of information are most relevant to me and which aren't. So when I started thinking about it, I sort of identified, okay, I like to be around people, but being around people makes me nervous. So that's an area that I need to focus on. So I was able to sort of, just ignore a lot of the other information out there and focus, narrow down on that, which I found really helpful.
I love that. So let me ask you, if you're willing to share, what was that mission statement?
It's been so many years since I first created it that I barely remember the original one. But in general, I mean, what I've sort of realized now is that it's basically about principles. Like I want to be a principled person. I want to be a good man. I want to be somebody who people rely on and can count on. Somebody who people like having around. I want to be good company. I want it to be enjoyable for people to work with me and to spend time with me. And I want to be a person who does what he says, what he's going to do, someone who you can trust to be true to his word. And so it's those sort of general principles that remind me who I want to be. And when I think about who I want to be, it becomes pretty clear what I need to do in order to be that person.
I love that. So, it's funny. I've been reading a lot of books on like military strategy lately, and in the older days, what they would do you've got a bunch of generals sitting around a war room, and they had this like really thick document that's kind of branching all these different eventualities of battle and war, and they expect like everyone to know this, but the reality is, for the soldier on the ground, like it's almost impossible for him to think of like, oh, that was subsection B, column C.
Right.
Like you can't think of that, but there's something on these books that they started to do. It used to be at the end of the book, but now it's at the beginning, called Commander's Intent. And what that is, it's that North Star of what do you want? What is the objective? So if the objective is like you need to protect the hill, and everyone knows what that is. So if you're the last soldier, you know what your purpose is on the battlefield. And I think it's really important with improvement as well, because if you have that sort of North Star, and something that can evolve and change over time, as I'm sure yours did, but if you have that commander's intent, you always know what to do. And so it's easier to tell if you're kind of got information paralysis, because you're looking at information that just doesn't apply for what you want. It's kind of the same in business as well. Like you have to have that clear goal. Otherwise, you're just going to be flapping around like, a leaf kind of, falling off a tree.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, as you say, it's with any goal. Like business is a good example, but I think, I think of fitness as well. I really started seeing results in the realm of fitness when I said, okay, I'm skinny. I want to add 10 pounds of muscle in the next 3 months. So what do I have to do in order to achieve that goal? And just having that really narrowed my focus and allowed me to realize, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And, you make adjustments as you go. So, at first I thought, okay, I've got to eat 6 times a day. And then I realized, no, I don't necessarily have to do that, but I have to eat at least 4. And if I skip 1 or 2, that's okay. But I have to make sure I'm doing something else over here. So it's, when you focus more on the why, it allows you to focus less on the what. And I think when you focus on the what, that's when you sort of stress out, because it's, you're thinking, am I doing the right thing? Constantly wondering, what am I going to do? But as long as you're working towards the why and you're comfortable with that and you can say that confidently, then the what doesn't matter as much.
I love that. I love that so much. So for everyone listening, like, it's worth it to take 10 minutes and turn off all of your devices, get a sheet of paper and say, like, who do I want to be in, some sort of time frame, like the next 3 months, the next 6 months, the next year, to really kind of hone, like, what is your North Star? There's a really good person. Her name is Debbie Millman, and what she advocates is kind of writing out what your ideal version of yourself would be doing in 5 years or 10 years. And she's done this with a bunch of her students. And, by and large, like, it's more accurate than it's not accurate, because what's funny is just it's a wrinkle of human nature is we move towards things that are clearly defined. And if you really define what you want to do and what you want to be, it's not law of attraction BS, but it's literally like, okay, well, I've got kind of a map for this. So the steps that I need to take to get there, it's going to be a lot clearer. And speaking of steps, we're going to take like an average guy, he's, 30 years old. He really, like, he's been somewhat successful in his career, but he wants to get to the next level in terms of his people skills, his confidence. A lot of that starts with mindsets. And I was wondering if you could speak to, like, what sort of mindsets someone might need when they're kind of wanting to hit the next gear in that area of their life.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I totally agree. Obviously, I think having the right mindset sort of underlies every other aspect of self improvement or personal development. So I think I mentioned like when I first started working out, having a better mindset helped me get into the gym. I was pretty intimidated just to set foot in the gym. So until I had a more confident mindset, I couldn't actually develop a more confident body. And the same is true for people skills and for style and for anything else. I think any other goal that you want to pursue. But when it comes to mindset, I think one of the big things that I've come to realize and that I've sort of identified in other people as well is that there are a few sort of tricks that your mind plays on you that hold you back. And for me, once I sort of became aware of what those tricks are, just becoming aware that they existed was really helpful. And then developing a couple strategies to overcome them really started to move the needle for me. So one of the big ones is just the negativity bias. Your mind basically is prone to thinking negative thoughts. And it's sort of this evolutionary holdover. So imagine a prehistoric man out in the jungle hunting and gathering. If he hears a rustle in the bushes and he thinks, oh no, that's a saber-toothed tiger, and he runs, he's going to be much more likely to get away from the tiger. But if he thinks, that's probably nothing, and he stays, well, if there is a saber-toothed tiger, now he's going to become lunch.
The reality is like probably plenty of cavemen did that, but they're not, like, their descendants aren't here.
Exactly. The ones who were cool with it are not here anymore. So I mean, obviously that was very helpful to our prehistoric ancestors, but it's not at all helpful today. So if you're doing something like, say you're looking at applying for a job and you're looking at a job posting and you're thinking, maybe I'm qualified, maybe I'm not, that little voice comes in, that negativity bias comes in and convinces you you're not qualified because of X, Y, or Z. And most of the time it's mostly bullshit, like most of the time it's really just you talking yourself out of it and your negativity bias kind of tricking you into thinking you're not qualified. So just becoming aware that that is a thing, I found to be really helpful and really sort of like revelatory, because now anytime I'm having those negative thoughts, anytime I'm basically getting down on myself, I can pause and take a breath and say, wait a second, is this really logical or is this just the negativity bias at play? So that was a big one for me.
Yeah. So, I mean, I love that and I've written about it. I'm a huge believer in exactly that. So our minds are very good. I mean, we've all got PhDs in negative, irrational visualization. So,
right.
There's a very big difference between thinking like, oh, I'm going to walk up to a group of people and start a conversation. Your saber-toothed tiger brain might think like, oh no, they're going to, start screaming and the police are going to come. Like, irrational stuff that doesn't make realistic sense. And the reality is, it's unconscious. So by the time that you've thought about it, it's already kind of pumped through your body and you're kind of getting those stress indicators. Something that I've kind of gotten into Stoic philosophy a little bit lately, and lately as in the last couple of years. But one thing that the Stoics suggest is doing negative visualization, but do it in a realistic way. So like, what's the realistic thing that could happen? And I usually reserve a little bit of time in the morning for this, where I think like, what's the most realistic negative outcome of the things that I might try to do today? And how would I correct course if that happens? In 99.9% of the time, the thing that I'm worried about doesn't happen, or at least doesn't happen how I thought it would. And even if something similar does happen, I already know kind of what my playbook's going to be. So I think having awareness over your mind's irrationality is really important. Like there's a really good book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Really good place to start with irrational thinking, and then also anything by Robert Cialdini. So influence or persuasion is also very good in that sphere. But I would love to get your thoughts on this because I've been thinking a lot about this lately. I think a good antidote for that is pronoia. So we're all aware of paranoia. We think the world's out to get us, but there's something called pronoia, and some people actually have pronoia, and it's like they think that the world's conspiring to help them out. So while you may not want to go that far, but getting a sip of the pronoia Kool-Aid, as it were, and thinking like, look, people are generally nice. I've been working a lot of my people skills. If I come up to them and I'm non-threatening and I'm showing that I'm a fun person to be around, like there's no reason why the outcome shouldn't be, neutral to positive. And I think expecting the best but planning for the worst is a good strategy to go about. But I would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I love that idea, and I love the whole philosophy behind it. I think you, like as you mentioned earlier, our brains are so good at going so far and so irrationally negative that going a little bit, even if it seems a little bit irrational, going a little, what might seem too far on the positive side, isn't actually that crazy because it's really just bringing you back into balance. So I love anything that's like that. I remember reading, I think it was in the book The Charisma Myth by Olivia Fox Cabane. She that's a great book for anybody who's
Yeah.
looking to develop their people skills.
Excellent book.
And yeah, and one of the things that she does is she sort of consults with CEOs and business leaders, both to sort of like study them and learn from some of the more confident ones, and then to help some of the ones who feel like they need help with things like public speaking and interacting with others. And anyway, I remember that she had this anonymous quote from one of the executives that she works with who said something to the effect of, he was talking about something similar about positive thinking, and he said something to the effect of how he is not just sort of tilted towards the positive, but he's actually actively deluding himself. He's actively delusional. And he prefers to get into that state because that's what makes him a higher achiever. So he puts himself into a state where everything is good and everything is likely to go well. And it's okay to take risks because even if you fail, you learn. And, he has to sort of get himself into a state where he is deluding himself at first. But you do that enough, and eventually that just becomes the way you think. That sort of becomes your instinct.
Yeah, I think it's much better to have the default operating system of you be something that, if we're looking at kind of an absolute scale, like we've got negative 100, we've got 0 in the middle, and we've got plus 100. Most people operate from like a negative 50, and that's kind of where they hang out. So if you think about the positive aspects, like that may just be getting you back to 0, or it might even be getting you a little bit in the positive, like plus 10, plus 20, plus 30. I think that's fine because while it may seem like you're wildly optimistic, the reality is you're probably just recentering yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really, like, this touches on something that is sort of a particular hobby horse of mine, which is the difference between skepticism and cynicism. One thing that drives me nuts is when people are being negative, being cynical, but they tell themselves that they're just being skeptical. They think they're being discerning and that it's an intelligent thing to do, to sort of constantly doubt and constantly sort of shit on things. And that's just quote unquote reality. But it's not. The reality is that your brain is basically tricking you. As you say, most people live at somewhere around a minus 50 as a default state. And you have to recognize that and do what you can to bring yourself at least up to 0 and ideally up into the black, into the positive.
Yeah. So we could dovetail on this all day, and we might. I might just keep you here all day. But something I've been thinking a lot about is if you take someone that's trying to improve, so they're trying to improve their confidence, trying to improve their mindset, trying to improve their people skills, their style, a lot of that comes from pushing those boundaries and getting uncomfortable. And I think it's easy to default to a place of either A, consuming a lot of action but not taking action, then you become an armchair cynic, and that's not good. Or trying something once, not getting the result, and then saying like, yeah, I tried it, and while you kind of adjust your belt buckle or whatever you do, and that's like being a one and done. So both those are not good because that's not leading you to anything sustainable. And something I love that you talk about is just making sure that the wins are small in the beginning, because I think that's so crucial. Because when you look at behavior, we're recording this in early 2018. It's kind of the gyms are full at the beginning of the year, but they're vacant in the spring and the summer, because I think people have a tendency to go a little too hard when they get fired up and motivated about a goal, because motivation, there's like a quote, like motivations for losers and winners have like systems, something like that. I might be making it
right,
but I think it's extremely true in any sphere that you're trying to improve.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm glad you brought up the gyms being full at this time of year, because I think fitness is a great example of this. I'm such a big fan of incremental progress and just stack up a series of small wins. And I think when you look at fitness, you see this, because if you want to transform your body, if you want to achieve anything, whether you're trying to burn fat or build muscle or compete in CrossFit or whatever it is you're trying to do, the way that you do it is not by hitting the gym once really hard. You can't go to the gym once and give it 200% and then be fitter. The way that you get fitter is you go to the gym every day or every other day for weeks or months or years, and you keep plugging away at it. You keep chipping away at it. You push yourself maybe just 1% further every time. But if you push yourself 1% further every time, every 100 workouts, you've doubled your progress. You've done 100% more than you could when you started. So I'm just such a big fan of incremental progress. And I think fitness is one area where it's obvious, but I think the same is true for anything. I think, like, take people skills, for example. Just as you can't go to the gym once and give 200% and all of a sudden be fit, if you're sort of a shy, introverted person, you can't just throw yourself into a big party and say you're going to talk to 100 people, and after that, you're going to be an extrovert or you're going to be more outgoing. It doesn't quite work like that. Instead, you want to stack up a series of small conversations. It can start with something as small as just smiling at somebody. Smile at somebody and they'll smile back, and that will make you feel good. That'll be a small little win. And then maybe the next day or the next week, you'll have the confidence to strike up a conversation and just talk about the weather or whatever, the local sports team, as the sort of prototypical small talk conversations.
I love that because, it's so true. Like when I see, people who want to improve their people skills, like, and it's only natural because you see this in a lot of different areas where people really want to glob on to tactics and tactic. How do I start conversations? How do I build rapport? Like tactics are going to be the answer. It's delicate because you want to ideally know the kind of the broad strokes of the mindset going in. You want to have something focused that you can practice on. So it might just be smiling at 10 people per day. I mean, anyone can do that, provided like you have a mouth.
Right.
So if you can do that, then you've built up some small wins, and guess what follows those actions? Your mindset follows those actions, because humans have a very deep-seated need for our psychology, our mindset to follow and be consistent with the actions that we take.
Right. Right. Yeah. And, it's funny that you mentioned the hacks and the tactics thing. And it just reminded me the story that we started off with about me talking to that guy about his trip to Portugal. And that went really well. And I mentioned that was sort of a hack or a tactic that I used. But that tactic is really based in a simple principle, which is that people like to talk about themselves. So one way to make people feel good is to give them a chance to talk about something that they like to talk about. And so it was that principle that led me to ask him about the trip, because I knew that in that particular instance, that was something that he would talk about and feel good about, and that made him feel good. So it just goes back to what we were talking about earlier about sort of those underlying principles. You don't have to remember 1,000 tactics or 1,000 hacks or what should I do if someone says X, Y, or Z. Just remember the basic principles of make people feel good, put a smile on their face, and they'll feel good about you too.
I love that so much. And I think a huge takeaway is, because I think what goes hand in hand with the negativity bias is the spotlight effect. So we're looking at, we think people are noticing us. It's very egocentric. And if you look at kind of humanity, I'm really into shows like, I like Cosmos, I like documentaries about like the Voyager probe and all that kind of stuff. And when you look at, like, when you zoom out and look at humanity, we thought that we were the center of like the universe. Then we thought we were the center of the solar system. So that speaks to me that there's always, I think there's an inherent ego that comes with just being a person. And sometimes that ego is great because, it protects you, it keeps you safe, it makes sure that you, like, if you're starving to death, you eat some food rather than maybe give that food to a bunch of people you don't know. So it can actually save your life.
Right.
But what the kind of the residue of that ego can do to you is, it puts people in a very internal place when they think like, I just need to learn some skills so I can talk to that person. Like with clients and readers, one of the things that I noticed first in their emails is the number of times they mention I. So I, me, I. Versus like, how do you want the other person to feel? How do you want them to feel when they exit the conversation? And when you put yourself in a place of what can I give in the conversation? What can I help the other person feel? It puts you in the exact right area to perform well.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And it reminds me of there's a stat that the stats have varied and there's been multiple studies on this, but anywhere between 40 to 60% of people identify as being shy. And I remember when I first heard that, because obviously, as I just mentioned, I myself was kind of a shy, introverted person. And I remember when I heard that, I thought, okay, that changes everything for me, because I just sort of, again, egocentric, putting myself first. I just always naturally assumed that I was the shyest person in the room, and that my shyness was sort of my quiet was deafening. You know what I mean? Everybody was noticing how shy I was and thinking about it and potentially talking about it when I wasn't there. But no, the truth is that at least half the people in the room felt exactly as I felt. And, half the people in any room you're ever going to go into probably feel shy and nervous. And when I started thinking like that, I sort of realized, okay, if everybody's feeling that way, what can I do? What one or two easy things could I do to make them feel a little bit less shy, to make them, to give them a little bit of relief, because I know that feeling so well. What do I want someone to do for me that would relieve my shyness, and how can I do that for them? And as soon as I just made that one switch and just started thinking like that, it's funny how quickly things change. And it's funny how easy interacting with people and talking to people and making small talk, all of that stuff became so much easier just by making that one switch and sort of making it not about me, but about the people I was talking to.
Hey, we'll get back to the show in a second. I just wanted to take a second and tell you, if you haven't signed up to receive email from me, please do. Go to becomemorecompelling.com/go, G-O. What you'll get is each week I'll send you an exclusive email where you get podcasts like you're listening to right now, where I have on charisma and people skill experts, and we have a conversation so that you can glean all that glorious information and use it to improve your career, your business, or your social life. You'll get Q&As where I have Q&As with readers, including video Q&As. You'll get actionable lessons and tools that you can use to become the most charismatic and compelling person you know, and you'll get a lot more stuff I never share publicly. So go to becomemorecompelling.com/go, and I'll see you after you sign up. Now back to the show. So going in with that mindset of like, because I'm a big fan of how questions. So when you think of like, if you self-identify as shy, which we could even rabbit hole down, like, be careful what you call yourself, because that's a whole other thing. But
oh yeah,
when you focus on like, I'm going to make this other person feel good in this conversation, like, what was that? Did that kind of maze take you to, one or two specific steps that you would take to make other people feel good? Like, how did that shift in mindset change your actions?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it sort of manifested in a couple of ways. One was the sort of principle that I talked about earlier of just giving them a chance to talk about something that they clearly enjoy or take pride in, which makes them feel good. And then they sort of appreciate being given the opportunity to talk about it. So, if and when that opportunity comes up, definitely give people that chance. Another one was just actually something that really helped me sort of overcome my fear of initiating, was, if I see somebody who is sort of either keeping to themselves or is in a group conversation, but not really engaged, just kind of there, doing what I can to engage that person and just say like, how about yourself? Where are you from? Or how do you know so-and-so? Or what brings you here? And just starting out. And I think I used to be so afraid that making that kind of conversation would seem too banal and too beneath me, and people would think it's just, small talk, and small talk is terrible and no one really wants to do that. And now I sort of understand the value of it. If there is a person who's a little bit shy or a little bit quiet or just not necessarily the most gregarious person in the room, they're really going to appreciate it if you just start asking them even the most basic questions about themselves. So it really helped me get over the hump of being too afraid to sort of initiate and take that initiative with people.
Yeah, it's funny. Something I've started doing in group conversation now is like, the nature of group conversations, people are going to float in, people are going to float out. It's part of it. So when a new person floats in, catching that person up and saying like, we were just talking about XYZ,
right,
to help include them in a group. And it's not only just kind of the right thing to do because you're taking the initiative. On kind of a larger level, it's framing you as a leader within the group, and it's framing you as a leader with your own psychology as well. So you're really winning on three different fronts just by taking the initiative, opening your mouth, and making sure that person's taken care of so they can feel more included, which is going to make the entire group have a more enjoyable conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And the other one that I like that kind of goes along with that is not assuming that the person you're talking to has knowledge that they maybe don't have. I've been in groups where, my friends are talking about whatever, some aspect of the economy that I don't fully understand or some technical principle that I don't fully understand. And no one's kind of taken the time to loop me in and catch me up on what's going on. So I just like to sort of operate on the idea that, don't assume that anybody has the knowledge that you have or the people you're talking to have, and pay them the courtesy of catching them up. And it's a tricky balance sometimes with something like that, because you don't want to seem condescending at all, but on the other hand, I always think it's rude not to at least try, like at least give them the option to say, oh yeah, actually I'm familiar with this.
It's as simple as like, have you heard of this thing? And,
exactly.
And then they might say like, no, I actually haven't. And then you're helping give everyone else context, which is going to improve the group conversation as well. So just those little things that you do that help you lead more of the conversation, which is, it's okay to step into that leadership role, but it also helps make you more confident as well. So let's talk, speaking of confidence, brutally awkward segue. It's really important, I think especially with men, because that's your audience. It can be difficult, like taking those leadership reins because of the things that we mentioned, the negativity bias, the spotlight effect. Like, what would you tell someone who knows that they need to step up a little bit more? Maybe they've gotten promoted a couple times, they've got some people that they're managing, so they're leading meetings, or they just know that like they can sense that their hesitation, because really I think a lot of it boils down to like hesitation versus being bold. When they know that that's not the right path for them, like how would you suggest that they go about kind of building that skill of confidence?
Yeah, I'd say for me, one of the things that helped the most was I started with books. I started with, like, as I mentioned, I've bought a ton of self-development books. And then when I sort of identified that people skills in particular were an area that I needed to improve, I narrowed in on that topic. And, there have been hundreds, maybe thousands of books written about people skills. But there are a few that are sort of, tried and true and sort of stand above the rest. And, you've got Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People is one of the classic ones. We just mentioned the charisma myth earlier. So there's a bunch of really good ones. But for me, I found that starting there was key, because one of the biggest sort of hurdles I had with interacting with people was basically not knowing how they might react to what I'm going to say. And there's a few, obviously there's lots of layers there as well, because arguably you shouldn't care so much about what people say or what people think of you. And that's all true as well. But in a situation where I specifically want to say something that is going to make somebody feel good about themselves and about me, then it does matter what they think, and it does matter how they're going to react. And for me, I found that the first place that I started to learn that was in books, because I sort of, and it's not necessarily just tactics and strategies that you learn from books, but almost like, human psychology and just sort of how the mind works and what are the general principles that people tend to appreciate. And once you have a stronger idea of those, and once you sort of read it and it's been sort of codified in your mind, then the nerves that I felt about saying X, Y, or Z started to evaporate, because I knew that I was operating according to a certain principle. I knew, for instance, as I mentioned a couple times now, people like to talk about themselves. So anytime that I was giving somebody the opportunity to do that, I knew I was sort of going in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, I really like that. And I both love and hate the advice like, you shouldn't care what people think, because that sounds like something said from an armchair to me. Because in the moment, say that you're leading a team and you have to get buy-in for this new process that's rolling out. Well, guess what? It matters a lot. So
right.
You've got to understand kind of the dynamics at play, so that while you can't control what people think, and I think this is what trips a lot of people up, is they can't control what people think, and they think they should. What you can do a lot of times, you can influence what people think.
Right, absolutely.
And I've also been doing a lot of reading over the last year on persuasion. How do you persuade people? Because it's so important in almost every sphere. We're all trying to persuade someone almost at all times. It's just if we're skilled or unskilled, conscious or unconscious. And the more skilled you are, the less conscious it becomes, obviously. But one thing that I've been kind of reading about and testing out on my own is, say that you're having I wouldn't even say a disagreement, but you're having a discussion with someone, and you guys have conflicting viewpoints. if you're trying to persuade someone, what's going to happen if you outright disagree with them? We know this from martial arts, force meets force. You're never going to persuade them by being right. And that feeling of like, well, I'm right. So that gives me, carte blanche to do whatever I want to try to win this argument. Because if you do, you wouldn't win, number one. But if you go down that path, then you probably damaged a relationship, at least in the short term, maybe in the long term. So I think when you let go of needing to be right, that opens up all kinds of interesting doors to you, so that you can actually do something in persuasion known as pacing and leading, where like, say we're having a disagreement on I'm going to put you on the spot. Give me a topic that we could disagree on.
Do you watch Game of Thrones?
I do not, and I don't care for it.
Okay, so there we go. Game of Thrones.
Okay, so this may fuck up real bad, but maybe it won't. So maybe we could disagree on a narrower point, like fantasy being something that's really interesting or not interesting. So I wouldn't come at you and say like, fantasy's stupid and and anyone that likes fantasy is like, I wouldn't ever do that. But what I might say is I don't understand a lot about the fantasy books in the fantasy world. Could you teach me a little bit about it? And that reframes everything. And then we might end up in a place where we're talking about like, well, fantasy can be a pretty broad scope. Like I really like the show Westworld because it's got robots, and now that I think about it, that's kind of fantasy too. So we're able to kind of parry each other instead of pushing back against things that we both hold as very dear to our hearts. And so that's an easy way to you're not going to persuade everyone, but you might persuade 5 or 10%. So it's a good way to help two people that are in conflict kind of arrive at a similar position, because when they realize that like, oh, we have more in common than we don't have in common, it changes the conversation completely.
Right, totally. And it goes back to, two of the sort of fundamental books that I've mentioned in the 7 habits. One of the habits, I forget which one. I want to say maybe number 4, but it's seek first to understand, then to be understood. And just that gesture of you tell me your perspective first, I'm going to really listen to it, and then I'll tell you mine, makes the other person much more receptive to what you have to say. And then, Dale Carnegie summed it up even better. He said, you catch more flies with honey, right? And it just sort of all goes back to that fundamental principle of treat people well, treat them with respect, let them say their piece and listen attentively. And then when it's your turn to speak and make your argument, you're going to get a lot further than you would have otherwise. Man,
it's so true. I remember when I first started to become more compelling, and I would get these emails with these people's, situation when it came to people skills. And I would jump right into giving advice mode. When that's the exact opposite of what I should have done. I seek first to understand, because the reality is, if you're going to dispense any sort of wisdom or advice, like you cannot lead with advice. You have to lead with understanding first and digging and asking questions. And now, like the thing I do with clients and readers is a lot of times when they'll email me something, super long, I'll pick out some stuff in there and I'll ask them questions, say, you tell me, what options do you have at this specific junction? And what do you think would be the best way to go about it? Because the reality is, if I set the platform for them to come up with their own solutions, that solution's going to stick. And it's going to stick really well. It's going to stick far greater than any, just generic advice that someone might, dole out.
Right. Yeah, no, I love that. Like, give people a chance to come up with it themselves, right?
Yeah. So I love that, confidence, people skills, always important, but you've actually got another component to your business, which is style. And that's something that's really cool, because, there's, like, I just got a haircut like 2 days ago. I was looking kind of shaggy. My CFO, my chief feline officer, was like, look, you got to get a haircut. This is ridiculous. You're bringing the office down. So I went and got a haircut at this great place it's kind of like an old school barbershop, really, really popular. And they sit you down in a chair for an hour and they really shape you up. And, you always leave feeling amazing, because, you change the way you look and you just look really fantastic. And new clothes can do that too, kind of finding that style that's uniquely yours. And that's a very good way to sort of take a shortcut in sort of like how you view yourself. So maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's, and it goes back to sort of, in some ways, you have to kind of throw out one of the principles that we're always taught as a kid, which is that looks don't matter. And yeah, looks definitely don't tell you anything about a person's character. They don't tell you about how good a person is. But looks do matter in a lot of ways. And I think they particularly matter when it comes to your own looks and how you feel about them. To me, that's what matters most. If you feel like you look good, you're going to carry yourself a little higher. You're going to feel a little bit better. You're going to have just a little bit more confidence speaking up in a meeting or whatever the case might be. And I like to use the analogy that, building self-confidence is a little bit like building a house. So first you've got the foundation, and that's kind of like your body. That's sort of like fitness, health. You have to make sure you're doing everything right in that sphere first. And then the next thing is your mindset, which is kind of like the house's wiring. So even if you have a well-built house that has faulty wiring, that's not really a place you want to live. And then, your people skills are like how many people live in the house. If you have a great looking house that's well wired, but it sits empty, what's the point? You need people in your life. And so you need people in the house. And then style is sort of the fourth thing, which is like the window dressing. How well designed is the house? And, if you're shopping for real estate, you might go into a house that is really poorly designed, but really has great bones, is really well built, and still be really interested in buying that house. The flip side is that you could also go to a house that maybe doesn't have the best foundation, but because it's so well designed, because the style of it, the window dressing is so good, you're going to be a little more interested than you would have otherwise. So for me, that's what style is. It's sort of the last thing that gets layered on top. It's not the most important thing, but it can make it an extra sort of 10, 15, 20% difference.
I really like that because I went from, well, I think we all did. Like we all wore polo shirts in high school. It's okay. You can raise your hand out there. As we get out in the world and we kind of go through our 20s and 30s, we realize that like, hey, you know what, style matters a little bit more because it's like you said, it's the polish, it's kind of the cherry on top. And I know something that guys struggle with when it comes to style is there's kind of that friction of feeling incongruous, like, oh man, I'm trying this leather jacket on. Is this leather jacket me? Mm-hmm. The thing I'm projecting to the world is different from the thing I have been projecting from the world. And that can cause a lot of friction. Like, what advice might you give someone who knows that they need to up their style game, but every time they go to the dressing room in the boutique men's clothing store, like, they just get this horrible bout of imposter syndrome? What kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah, so that's a great point. So I recommend creating something that I call the personal style profile. So I've written a whole blog post about this. So if anybody's interested, they can go check it out on my blog. But the personal style profile is basically, what is the look that best projects who you are at your highest ambition? And that's going to be different for everybody, So for somebody who works on Wall Street, that might mean a really sharp suit and, expensive ties, expensive shirts, the whole 9 yards. For someone that works at a tech startup, it might mean like cool sneakers and skinny jeans and, cardigan sweaters or whatever it is. If you're into the whole like gothic scene, it might mean like all black. So it's going to mean very different things to very different people. But the personal style profile is basically my way of sussing out what are those things for you? What are the things that are most important to you? What is going to best project the person that you feel like inside? So I've laid out a whole number of steps that you can go through, and it doesn't take too long to just sort of fill out this profile that I've put up on the blog. And by the end of it, you sort of realize, okay, this is my style profile. This is the person who I want to be. This is the person that I want to project to the world. And therefore, these are the types of clothes and the types of pieces that I should be looking for.
And that's really nice. It kind of goes back to that commander's intent that we talked about a few minutes ago, where what that does effectively, it takes all the potential options and it narrows down like thousands and thousands and thousands of things that you could look for to like really focus, like, okay, look, this is what I'm going for. So when you actually head out the door to shop, and there are even options nowadays with like Trunk Club and stuff like that where you can have it dropped off at your house. So
right. There's
really no excuse to, at least get a few staple pieces and maybe just starting with one or two complete, ensembles that you can trot out, maybe one at work, maybe one at play, that kind of thing, so that you can start looking good really, really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And just as when I put together a mission statement, it helped me sort of tune out all the stuff that was now irrelevant to who I wanted to be. Same with the personal style profile. Once I sort of realized, okay, this is who I am. This is the look I want to project. This is what makes me feel like I'm at my best. So now if I'm looking through Instagram or Pinterest or whatever, and I see that cool, whatever it is, cool leather jacket or cool piece that I recognize looks awesome, I can also recognize, that's great, but it's just not for me.
So, there's a lot of value in saying like what's not for you, just like what's for you. I love that. I'm gonna hit you with a couple of rapid fire questions if that's okay.
Okay, let's do it.
So I like to ask my podcast guests like if they could send one text message for in your case to like men age 25 to 35, like if you could send one text message to every guy, what would it say?
Oh, that one's easy. It would say self-confidence isn't something you're born with, it's something you build. Because I think that gets at it, like it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what attributes you feel like you have. Like you can always build your self-confidence and create your own self-confidence.
Yeah, I like that because even though like, and granted, it probably feels like you and I are probably in the self-development bubble. So I can still remember what it was like when I was developing. I think the assumption that a lot of people make, especially guys, is that they just assume that some people have it and some people don't, because that's kind of the default operating system that we're kind of taught our entire lives. Looking at you, Disney movies, like the messaging from when we're little is like people should like you for who you are. You are just fine the way you are. You're a special little snowflake, and I hate to wad that snowflake up into a ball and throw it away, but I just did. It's something that you have to cultivate it, because look, no one's going to hand it to you. You have to go out and get it. Otherwise you won't. And your entire life,
yeah.
Similar, like people that are colleagues, whatever, like they may get promoted and go off and do great things. People may start companies and you'll just be on the sidelines wondering what happened. But if you take ownership over this part of your life, then it's scary because you're on the hook for success or failure. And it also means that you have to take action, but that's much more, that's a better place to be when you're 80 and looking back at your life than I wish I had.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it's just like, there really is no ceiling. You know what I mean? Like you can achieve whatever it is you want to achieve if you get started and get going. And I think for so long, I felt like I just am who I am and there's no changing it. So, I'm not very outgoing. I'm not very extroverted. So I'm never going to have very strong people skills. And no, that was totally wrong. People skills are just like any other skills. They can be cultivated and developed. And once you do that, once you put in the work to do that, you will feel more confident about it. And the same is true of fitness, and the same is true of your mindset and your style and any other realm of life.
Yeah. And I feel like one thing I should mention, we don't have to bunny trail down it too hard, but it just made me think of like the story that we tell ourselves when we think of like, oh, I'm shy and that's who I am. Like I think it's so important to question those assumptions, because A, those assumptions probably aren't true, and B, even if they are somewhat true, like it actually doesn't matter because they're malleable. You can change it. So one thing
right.
that I remember doing a lot, and I still do it to this day, because we've all got an internal monologue that is on repeat constantly. So if you notice that you're not saying nice things about yourself, or you're saying like, oh, I just don't care about anything, or whatever it might be, like I flip that on its head immediately if I catch it and I'm like, well, actually that's not true, or maybe it's not true, or what if it was the opposite? And I really go hard and question that hard, because almost like a unseen hand that guides like those negative, you can call them limiting beliefs, whatever you might call them. They guide you, like it's who's steering the ship.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, your output is the product of your inputs. So if you flood yourself with positivity, you're going to be much more prone to being a positive person. And I think, your brain has a very tough time distinguishing between what's real and what's fake. And that's one of the reasons why you wake up from a dream in a sweat. You're terrified, your heart rate is elevated, because your body has been activated as if you really were in a scary situation, even though it was just a dream. And so the flip side of that is it works the same way on the positive end. If you spend time focusing on gratitude, focusing on things that make you feel good, you really can move the needle and flood your body with positive chemicals that really do make you feel just as good as if you just, won the lottery or just got the job or got the girl or whatever it is your goal is.
So do you have any strategies that you use when it comes to gratitude?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big ones for me is I've gotten really into gratitude journaling. There's a journal called I think it's called the 5 Minute Journal, which is what I started with. So I started using that a couple of years ago, and it's basically just outlines a very simple strategy, which is every day write down 3 things that you're grateful for. I like to do it in the morning. I think the way that they prescribe it is there's a little bit to do in the morning, a little bit to do at the end of the day, but it really does take just 5 minutes, and it doesn't have to be complicated. You just write down 3 things that you're grateful for. It could be big or small. It could be anything. But just doing that forces you to get into the mindset of thinking about something that you're grateful for, thinking about something that you have in your life. Because again, the negativity bias is there. It's creeping in. It's probably preventing you from focusing on the many good things in your life, but there are good things. So I just find like first thing in the morning, jotting down 3 things that I'm grateful for. And then I've sort of expanded it into jotting down my goals for the day and a few other things. But just writing down those 3 simple things really does put me in a positive mindset.
I do the same thing. I'm using the Daily Stoic Journal right now. My wife got it for me for Christmas, and it has writing prompts for each day, and a lot of it's, at least it's really early because it's 365 prompts, and we're only on day 22. But a lot of it's centered around what you can control, what you can't control, knowing the difference. And I mean, I think it's really important to exercise gratitude. And I resisted journaling for so long. Like, yeah. I wonder how much more awesome my life would be if I actually had just bit the bullet and done it, started like 10 years ago. But what it does is it literally, like, I know Tim Ferriss has said this before, but it traps those thoughts and anxieties on the paper, because sometimes just going through the process and thinking about it and churning that out, it does something where those anxieties and those things that would maybe kind of be cramping up your internal monologue, guess what? They're actually stuck to the paper now, so you can move on and you can have a little bit more clarity throughout your day.
Right. Yeah, totally. And I find the same thing. Once I write down, what do I want to do today? What are my goals? That really helps me sort of get rid of the anxiety. I used to feel this anxiety when I woke up in the morning, sort of thinking, okay, what am I going to do today? How am I going to get myself closer to my goals? Like, what should I do? And just writing down 3 easy wins for the day really helps alleviate that, because it just sort of focuses you. It puts it down on the paper, and it just, relieves you of that sort of mental pressure that you put on yourself.
So Dave, you actually have a new book. Congratulations, by the way.
Oh yeah, thanks, man.
Writing is not that easy, but you just have to do it every day. So if you would walk us through what your book is about.
Yeah, sure. So the book is called Ready to Roar: How Shy, Quiet, Self-Doubting Guys Become Strong, Charming, Self-Confident Men. And it's about a lot of the things that we've just talked about. Essentially, what I've tried to do is create more or less a roadmap for guys who are much like myself when I was young, when I was 19, 20 years old, and just feeling sort of insecure and uncertain about myself and my abilities, and how to get from that point to a point of confidence and self-assurance and, waking up every day feeling positive, feeling good about who I am and what I can accomplish and what I can do in this world. So I really just wanted to sort of codify everything that I've learned on this now decade-plus journey that I've been on of self-improvement and self-development. And I really wanted to focus it to young guys, because obviously there are 1,001 personal development, self-improvement books out there. And I feel like I've read most of them at this point. But what I have never read is something that was specific to the type of guy that I was, which was, as I said, like a introverted, somewhat shy guy who felt like he had potential, felt like he had confidence in certain areas of his life, but not in others. So I really wanted to share everything I've learned about becoming confident, about sort of building that real, deep, authentic type of self-confidence. And I wanted to give advice that was specifically targeted to young guys.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I actually took a peek inside the book, and one of the first things that you talk about is you talked yourself out of applying for a job.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you don't mind, just to kind of give a little teaser, would you mind walking us through that and what that was like for you?
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned earlier that I was working at a company that publishes fitness and health magazines, and I was actually the managing editor, which is the second in command after the editor in chief of. So I was managing editor of two titles. One was the women's fitness title at this company, and one was the healthy cooking magazine. So as the managing editor of two titles, I was second in command. They happened to be the two best-selling titles at the company. So I knew that I was well liked and well respected. I had a good reputation with my colleagues and with my bosses. And then the company was launching what essentially a competitor to Men's Health, a men's fitness magazine, and they were looking for a new editor in chief for that magazine. So on paper, I had a lot of the skills that they needed. I was already the second in command at the two most popular best-selling magazines at the company. I had good relationships with the people who were doing the hiring. I had the right skill set. I had a couple of years of managerial experience under my belt. So there was really no reason not to apply for this job. In almost every way, I was qualified for this job. And yet I let my negativity bias, I let my insecurity basically talk me out of it. So, little things like I looked at the job posting and I think it said they were looking for something like 5+ years of editorial management experience. And I only had 2 or 3 years. So I thought, oh no, I can't apply. I'm already not qualified. And then I would say, I would tell myself, I'm a good managing editor, but I don't know what goes into being an editor in chief. There are probably all sorts of aspects to that job that I can't even imagine. So I probably shouldn't even apply. And so ultimately, I didn't apply. I didn't even talk to my colleagues about it. I didn't ask around for advice, ask anybody if they thought I should apply. I just basically did nothing about it. And in the end, they hired a guy who also didn't have everything they were looking for on paper, but had a few other things, had a few other assets. So they thought he would be a good fit. And looking back on it, I think it's probably pretty likely that had I applied, I would have at least been given a very close look, if not been given the job. So that was just a textbook example of my own insecurity keeping me from taking a risk. Even, it wasn't even a big risk, but keeping me from putting myself out there and doing something that would have led to my benefit.
Our lives they're almost defined by the opportunities that we capitalize on, and they're also defined by I'm a baseball fan, so when we look at strike three and we don't even swing. So ultimately, we just want to. I would rather strike out swinging than look at a fastball right down the middle, or
exactly,
a curveball that I could probably hit, because I know that the swing, especially when it comes to jobs too, like not to go off the rails too far, but like, it's funny. I remember having a lot of those same trepidations when I would apply for jobs when I was a little younger, but now I literally look at like the job requirements and I assume that they're all malleable. Like, like that's what they're looking for. But when they meet me, they're gonna love me.
Right.
And I'm not gonna apply to be a surgeon because I haven't been to medical school. But like if it's in your sphere and you think that there's a chance, you owe it to yourself to be ambitious and take those actions. Because if it works out, great, that could change your entire life. And if it doesn't work out, you know what? You're gonna learn something. So that's also a win.
Right, exactly. And that, you learn that just by sort of being in the workforce. After a couple of years, you learn that those job postings are malleable. And then the same thing is true, I think, in terms of other things. So, that story was a story of a job I didn't go after, but I've also got about 1,000 stories of girls who I couldn't muster the courage to ask out. And, all sorts of other opportunities that I just couldn't go after. And one thing you learn is that, these things are all malleable, and they're probably much closer to being achievable than you might think.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I remember my wife and I have been married for almost 4 years at this point, and when we first started dating, like I was very deep into pronoia at that point, so I would just imagine good things happening. And when you imagine good things happening, when you imagine, like, of course, this was like when we were dating, it was 2011, so. The iPhone was around, text messaging was still around. Well, still around. It's still around now. But it wasn't quite as prevalent as it is in today's world. So I think since the dawn of the text message, we've all been in that position where we want to date a girl, we're talking to her, and she hasn't returned our text message. And that just doesn't feel good, because that negativity bias comes into play. And and we think the worst. It's like, oh, she hates me. Should I text? Should I not text? But when you have a mindset of like, imagine good things happening, that colors all the assumptions that you make. So if it had been a day or two, I was like, well, you know what? She's probably just busy. And actually, what's funny is very early on in our relationship, she actually had a dumb phone back then, like a Nokia brick phone. And on those old phones, you actually, if you got too many text messages, the memory would fill up, the storage would fill up, and you couldn't receive new text messages.
Oh, right.
I know I'm taking it I'm taking it old school right now, T9 stuff. So I'd text her and we would talk every night. And one night when we talked, she was like, I really wish you'd text me more. And I was like, yeah, okay, yeah. We didn't really go down to like what the root cause of the issue could be. Like your phone might be messed up. Right. So like I would text her a bunch during the day, and then we would still talk every night. And she's like, I really wish you'd text me more. And we figured out that like your phone's storage is full. You're not getting any text messages. And once you fixed it, like, of course, everything was fine. But it's just funny how those little things can happen. But our mindset colors like what assumptions we make, because as humans, we're always trying to fill in the gaps. Like no matter what, we're always trying to fill in the gaps. You actually have a lot of control if you fill in those gaps with positive things or negative things. That's within your control.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so funny, your story about the texting is a perfect example of that. I'm working on my next book already, which is about just this sort of stuff. It's about helping guys, get over their self-doubt and their negative thinking when it comes to dating. Because obviously for guys, especially guys, the type of guys who I'm speaking to in their sort of 20s and 30s, dating is such a huge aspect of life. And I find that speaking to women and anything to do with romance can be one of the most intimidating parts of life, especially if you're already sort of an introverted or shy person who's had some trouble in that realm anyway. So yeah, that's a whole other rabbit hole we could go down. We should speak again about that one, but absolutely it's a rich topic for sure.
Yeah. Well, Dave, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Let me tee this one up for you. If people want to find out more about you, where can they locate you?
So the best place is at my website, irreverentgent.com. And if you're not sure how to spell that, just punch it into Google. And as long as you get kind of close, it'll point you in the right direction. I'm also on Twitter at Irreverent Gent. And then my book, Ready to Roar, is now on Amazon.
Nice. And it's on Amazon. It's on iBooks as well.
That's right, yeah.
And something called Kobo, which I've never heard of, but I'm sure it's something cool that the kids are using.
Exactly. It's every platform for you.
Awesome. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation. We'll definitely have to do it again.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Yeah.